The ion storm hit without warning. One moment, Captain Elias Venn was navigating his cargo ship through the calm expanse of space, and the next, everything around him erupted into chaos. Bright streaks of electric blue tore through the void, crackling with energy that surged against the hull of his vessel like an angry beast clawing at its prey. Alarms blared loudly, their shrill tones filling the cockpit as every system on board flickered erratically. Elias gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles turning white as he fought to stabilize the ship. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, under his breath, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. But the ship wasn't listening. It groaned and shuddered violently, sparks flying from panels scattered across the cockpit. The navigation screen glitched, displaying fragmented images of stars before going completely dark. For a brief second, silence fell, deafening and oppressive, as if the universe itself had paused to watch what would happen next. And then it came. A deafening boom that shook the entire ship. A massive wave of energy slammed into the vessel, sending it spiraling out of control. Elias's body lurched forward, straining against the harness holding him in place. His head collided painfully with the edge of the console, but there was no time to nurse the injury. He had to act fast. Through sheer willpower, Elias managed to regain partial control of the ship, guiding it toward the nearest moon visible on the cracked monitor. It wasn't much. A barren rock floating in the emptiness of space, but it was better than drifting aimlessly until the oxygen ran out or another blast finished them off. With one final push, he steered the ship downward, bracing himself for impact. The landing was rough. The ship skidded across the surface, kicking up clouds of dust and debris as metal scraped against the ground. When it finally came to a stop, Elias sat motionless for several seconds, catching his breath and assessing the damage. His ears rang from the noise, and his vision swam slightly, but he was alive. That was something. Stepping outside, Elias found himself standing on unfamiliar terrain. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, bathed in hues of violet and silver beneath two glowing suns hanging low in the sky. Strange plants with bioluminescent leaves dotted the area, casting soft glows that danced in the gentle breeze. Despite the beauty, there was an eerie stillness to the place, as though nature itself held its breath. Elias scanned the horizon, searching for anything useful, shelter, resources, anything to help him repair the ship. But all he saw was desolation. Sighing heavily, he turned back toward the wreckage. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by exhaustion and frustration. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, his boot caught on something hidden beneath the dirt. Kneeling down, he brushed away the soil to reveal a smooth, metallic surface. Curiosity piqued, Elias dug further until he uncovered what appeared to be some kind of pod. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen, sleek and otherworldly, with intricate patterns etched into its surface that seemed to shimmer faintly. As he examined it more closely, a faint hum emanated from within, growing louder with each passing second. Suddenly, the pod began to open, splitting apart with a hiss of released pressure. Inside lay a figure unlike any human Elias had encountered before. Her skin glowed softly, almost translucent, and her hair floated around her head as though suspended in water. She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal iridescent eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. For a moment, neither of them moved. They simply stared at each other, locked in a silent exchange. Then she spoke, or rather tried to. Her words were garbled, a mix of sounds that made no sense to Elias. Frowning, she paused, tilting her head as if considering her options. Finally, after a long pause, she said clearly, "Only one bed." Elias blinked, unsure whether to laugh or panic. Of all the things she could have said, this was not what he expected. Before he could respond, she climbed awkwardly out of the pod, wobbling slightly on unsteady legs. She looked around curiously, taking in the alien surroundings with wide-eyed wonder. Then, without hesitation, she grabbed his arm and started pulling him back toward the ship. "What are you doing?" Elias asked, trying to keep up with her surprisingly strong grip. She didn't answer, merely pointing toward the ship and repeating, "Bed." It took a while for him to piece together what she meant. Apparently the pod had been damaged during whatever journey brought her here, leaving her disoriented and likely exhausted. And since his own ship was barely functional, offering her shelter seemed like the only logical choice. Besides, he reasoned, it wasn't like he had anywhere else to go either. Back inside the cramped quarters of the ship, Elias gestured toward the narrow cot bolted to the wall. There, he said, pointing. That's the bed. Without missing a beat, she crawled onto it, curling up on one side and closing her eyes. Moments later, her breathing slowed, signaling sleep. For a while, Elias just stood there watching her. There was something undeniably strange about her presence, yet also strangely comforting. In the days ahead, he knew they would face countless challenges, repairing the ship, surviving the harsh environment, figuring out who or what she really was. But for now, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and cast the cabin in shadow, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The next morning, Elias woke up stiff and sore from spending the night on the cold metal floor of the ship's crew quarters. His back ached, and his neck felt like it had been twisted into an unnatural position. He groaned softly as he sat up, rubbing his eyes to clear away the haze of sleep. The alien girl, whom he had mentally nicknamed Luma after her glowing skin, was still asleep on the narrow cot. Her chest rose and fell rhythmically, her breathing slow and steady. For a moment, Elias simply watched her, marveling at how peaceful she looked despite everything they had been through. He shook his head, trying to focus. There was no time for idle thoughts. Survival came first. Pushing himself to his feet, he grabbed a ration bar from the storage compartment and began munching on it absent-mindedly, while checking the status of the ship's systems. Most of them were still offline, though some minor functions had come back online overnight. It wasn't much, but it gave him hope that repairs might be possible if he could scavenge enough parts from the wreckage outside. As he worked, Luma stirred awake. She blinked lazily, her iridescent eyes locking onto Elias almost immediately. Sitting up slowly, she stretched her arms above her head, emitting a soft hum that resonated faintly in the small room. Then, without warning, she swung, her legs over the side of the bed and hopped down, landing lightly on her bare feet. Elias froze mid-task, unsure what to expect, but instead of saying anything, Luma walked over to him, her movements graceful yet curious. She tilted her head slightly, studying the tools in his hands with obvious fascination. Reaching out tentatively, she touched one of the wrenches, running her fingers along its surface as though memorizing its texture. When she glanced up at him, her expression was filled with unspoken questions. "You want to help?" Elias asked cautiously, holding up the tool. She nodded enthusiastically, her lips curling into a smile that made her entire face light up, literally. Her skin seemed to shimmer brighter when she smiled, casting a warm glow around her. It was mesmerizing. Over the course of the day, Luma proved to be surprisingly resourceful. Though she couldn't understand most of what Elias said, she picked up on his actions quickly. When he pointed to a damaged panel, she mimicked his gestures, using her own hands to trace the outline of the problem. At one point, she even tapped on the console herself, causing a series of lights to flicker back to life. Elias stared at her in astonishment. "How did you do that?" he asked, though he knew she wouldn't have an answer. Despite their growing rapport, there were moments when Luma's behavior left Elias baffled and occasionally alarmed. During lunch, she reacted violently to the sound of a distant explosion outside, her body tensing as if bracing for impact. Her eyes widened, pupils contracting into tiny pinpricks, and she let out a sharp gasp before pressing her hands over her ears. Elias hurried to comfort her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said soothingly. "It's just noise. We're safe here." But safety was relative. Later that evening, as they prepared to settle in for the night, Luma accidentally brushed against a wall near the ship's power core. A sudden burst of energy shot outward, leaving behind a scorched mark where her hand had touched. Startled, Elias jumped back, staring at the damage in disbelief. What was that?" he stammered, turning to look at her. Luma appeared, equally shocked, cradling her hand close to her chest. Her skin pulsed with a faint blue light, and for a moment Elias thought he saw sparks dancing across her fingertips. She met his gaze, her expression apologetic, as if she hadn't meant to cause harm. Slowly, she reached out toward him again, this time placing her palm gently against his chest. At first, nothing happened. Then, without warning, Elias's vision blurred, and vivid flashes of images flooded his mind. He saw stars collapsing in, on themselves, entire galaxies consumed by darkness. He witnessed strange beings fleeing in panic, their forms shifting and morphing as they tried to escape destruction. And amidst it all, he sensed a deep sadness, a sorrow so profound it brought tears to his eyes. When the vision ended, Elias stumbled backward, clutching his head. His heart raced and his breath came in short, ragged gasps. Luma stood frozen, her hand hovering uncertainly in the air. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Elias managed to find his voice. "What? What was that?" he whispered, hoarsely. Luma didn't answer verbally, but her eyes softened with understanding. She stepped closer, resting her hand on his arm once more. This time there were no visions, only warmth, a comforting presence that seemed to say, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." Though shaken, Elias couldn't deny the connection forming between them. Over the next few days, their bond deepened further. They developed a unique way of communicating, relying on gestures, drawings, and shared glances to bridge the gap between their languages. Luma showed particular interest in human emotions, often imitating Elias's expressions with childlike curiosity. If he laughed, she would try to mimic the sound, her attempts clumsy but endearing. If he frowned in frustration, she would tilt her head sympathetically, as if sensing his mood. One evening, as they sat together sharing rations, Luma suddenly pressed her hand against his chest again. This time, Elias braced himself, expecting another flood of memories. Instead, he felt something different, calmer, warmer. Images of Earth appeared in his mind. Lush forests, sprawling cities, people laughing and living their lives. Mixed within these scenes were fragments of Luma's own experiences, glimpses of her past that hinted at a greater purpose. He saw her standing beside others like her, their bodies glowing brightly as they worked together to stabilize dying stars. He saw her alone, drifting through space in the pod, her mission unclear, but her determination unwavering. When the connection broke, Elias found himself staring at her in awe. "You're not just an alien," he murmured. "You're something more." Luma smiled faintly, her skin glowing brighter in response. Whether she understood his words or simply felt the sincerity behind them, Elias couldn't tell. What he did know was that she trusted him, and that trust went both ways. Whatever secrets she carried, whatever mysteries surrounded her arrival, Elias was determined to uncover them. Not because he needed answers, but because he wanted to help her. Somehow, in the span of just a few days, she had become more than just a stranger. She was a companion. Someone who had slipped quietly into his life and changed it forever. As they lay down to rest that night, Luma curled up beside him on the narrow cot once again. This time, Elias didn't protest. He wrapped an extra blanket around them both, shielding them from the chill of the ship's interior. As her breathing grew steady and soft, he allowed himself to relax, lulled by the rhythmic hum of her presence. For the first time since the crash, Elias felt a flicker of hope. They were stranded, injured, and surrounded by uncertainty, but they weren't alone. Together, they might just find a way forward. The days on the moon stretched long and arduous, but Elias found himself growing more accustomed to Luma's presence. She had become a constant source of both wonder and mystery, her actions often leaving him baffled, yet intrigued. Each morning began with the same routine, checking the ship's systems, scavenging for parts from the wreckage outside, and attempting repairs that seemed increasingly futile. Yet despite the bleakness of their situation, there was an undeniable rhythm to their shared existence, a fragile harmony built on mutual trust and curiosity. Luma proved invaluable in ways Elias hadn't anticipated. Her ability to manipulate energy wasn't just limited to accidental bursts. She could focus it with precision when needed. One afternoon, while working on a damaged circuit panel, Elias struggled to loosen a stubborn bolt. Frustration mounted as sweat dripped down his forehead, his hands trembling from exertion. Sensing his struggle, Luma stepped forward, placing her glowing hand near the bolt. A soft pulse of light emanated from her palm, and the bolt twisted free without resistance. Elias stared at her, wide-eyed. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" he said with a chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. Luma grinned in response, her skin shimmering brighter as if proud of herself. It was moments like these, small victories amidst chaos, that kept despair at bay. But not all surprises were pleasant. One evening, as they returned to the ship after another grueling day of work, Luma suddenly froze mid-step. Her body went rigid, her eyes darting toward the horizon. Elias followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the endless expanse of glowing vegetation bathed in the dim light of the twin suns. "What is it?" he asked cautiously, reaching for the makeshift weapon he carried for protection. Before Luma could respond, a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Moments later, 3 sleek drones emerged from behind a cluster of bioluminescent trees, their metallic bodies gleaming ominously under the fading sunlight. They hovered silently, scanning the area with cold efficiency. Elias instinctively grabbed Luma's arm, pulling her closer. "Stay behind me," he whispered urgently. The drones locked onto them almost instantly, their sensors whirring as they processed the data. Then, without warning, they fired. Bright beams of energy shot toward them, narrowly missing as Elias dove to the side, dragging Luma with him. The ground sizzled where the blasts struck, blackened marks spreading outward like spiderwebs. Panic surged through Elias's veins, but he forced himself to think clearly. There was no way they could outrun the drones, not in this terrain. But maybe they could outsmart them. "Luma," he hissed, turning to face her. "Can you do something about those things, like disable them?" She hesitated, her expression conflicted. For a moment, Elias thought she might refuse, or worse, panic again. But then determination flashed across her face, and she nodded sharply. Rising to her feet, she stepped away from him, raising her hands toward the drones. Her skin began to glow brighter than ever before, pulsating with an intensity that made Elias shield his eyes. The air crackled with electricity, and a deafening roar echoed through the landscape as a massive wave of energy erupted from her body. The drones faltered, their movements jerky and erratic as the electromagnetic pulse disrupted their systems. One by one, they plummeted to the ground. Lifeless husks of metal sprawled among the glowing plants. When the surge subsided, Luma collapsed to her knees, visibly weakened. Elias rushed to her side, helping her back to her feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched into his voice. She nodded weakly, though her breathing remained labored. As he supported her weight, guiding her back to the safety of the ship, Elias couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and fear. Luma's powers were extraordinary, but they came at a cost, and the implications of what she was capable of weighed heavily on his mind. Back inside the ship, Elias tended to Luma as best he could, offering her water and ensuring she rested. While she recovered, he took stock of their predicament. Whoever or whatever had sent those drones would likely return, and next time, they wouldn't be so easily deterred. They needed to move quickly, find a way off this moon before it was too late. As he mulled over their options, Luma stirred awake. Sitting up slowly, she gestured for his attention. Using her finger, she traced patterns into the thin layer of dust covering the floor of the cabin. At first, Elias couldn't make sense of the shapes, but then realization dawned. She was drawing constellations, specific ones that formed a recognizable pattern in the night sky. "You're trying to show me coordinates?" he asked, pointing at the diagram. She nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up with excitement. Grabbing a nearby star chart, Elias cross-referenced the patterns she had drawn. To his astonishment, they matched a distant nebula located several light years away. a region of space known for its dense clusters of stars and swirling clouds of gas. That's where we need to go, he asked, holding up the chart. Luma nodded again, pressing her hand against his chest. This time, instead of overwhelming visions, Elias felt a sense of urgency, a quiet but insistent message that this journey was crucial. Determined to act, Elias set to work repairing the ship's navigation system, using Luma's guidance to input the new destination. Progress was slow, hampered by limited resources and frequent interruptions from Luma's attempts to assist, though her intentions were good. Her unpredictable bursts of energy occasionally caused setbacks, frying delicate components and forcing Elias to start over. Through it all, their bond continued to deepen. Luma grew bolder in expressing herself, experimenting with sounds and gestures to communicate. One night, as they huddled together in the cramped quarters, she hummed softly, creating a melody that resonated throughout the cabin. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, evoking emotions Elias couldn't quite put into words. He listened intently, captivated by the raw emotion conveyed through such a simple act. When the song ended, Luma looked at him expectantly, as if waiting for feedback. Smiling warmly, Elias clapped his hands gently. "That was incredible," he said sincerely. "Thank you." Her smile widened, her skin glowing faintly in response. In that moment, Elias realized how much she relied on him, not just for survival, but for connection. Despite their differences, they had formed a partnership unlike any other, bound by necessity and strengthened by trust. Finally, after days of relentless effort, the ship was ready, or as ready as it could be given the circumstances. Elias powered up the engines, watching anxiously as the gauges flickered to life. The hull groaned in protest, but the systems held steady. Turning to Luma, who stood beside him with a look of quiet anticipation, he gave a reassuring nod. "All right," he said firmly. "Let's see where those stars take us." As the ship lifted off the surface of the moon, Elias glanced out the viewport one last time. The glowing landscape receded into the distance, replaced by the vast emptiness of space. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, danger, and perhaps answers to questions neither of them fully understood. But for now they were moving forward, together. Luma placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. Whatever awaited them beyond the stars, Elias knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't face it alone. The journey through the void of space was anything but smooth. The ship groaned and shuddered with every passing hour, its damaged systems straining under the immense pressure of interstellar travel. Elias sat hunched over the controls, his eyes scanning the flickering monitors for any sign of trouble. Beside him, Luma remained eerily still, her glowing skin casting faint shadows across the cabin walls. Though outwardly calm, there was an underlying tension in her posture, a quiet alertness that suggested she was just as aware of their precarious situation as he was. For days they drifted through the endless expanse, navigating toward the nebula Luma had indicated. Each moment stretched longer than the last, filled with the hum of strained engines and the occasional crackle of static from the ship's dying communication array. Sleep came sparingly, if at all. When exhaustion finally claimed Elias, he would wake abruptly, startled by phantom alarms or the sound of metal creaking ominously around him. Every time Luma was there, watching silently, her presence a steadying force in the chaos. Despite their shared resolve, cracks began to form in their fragile alliance. Luma's unpredictable bursts of energy continued to pose a threat, not just to the ship but to their survival. One night, while Elias worked tirelessly to repair a failing stabilizer, she accidentally discharged a surge that fried an entire panel of wiring. Sparks flew, forcing him to leap back to avoid injury. Frustration boiled over as he slammed his wrench against the wall. "Do you even realize what you're doing?" he snapped, his voice sharp with anger. "We're barely holding this thing together as it is." Luma flinched, her luminous skin dimming slightly as though reflecting his emotions. She didn't respond verbally, she rarely did, but her wide eyes conveyed a mixture of guilt and sorrow. For a moment, Elias regretted his outburst. He knew she wasn't acting maliciously. Her abilities were beyond her control, tied to instincts and reflexes she couldn't fully comprehend. Still, the stakes were too high for mistakes. Taking a deep breath, Elias softened his tone. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's just, we can't afford any more setbacks, not now." Luma nodded slowly, stepping closer to examine the damage. Without hesitation, she placed her hands near the ruined panel, her skin pulsating gently. A faint hum filled the air, as energy flowed from her fingertips, mending the broken wires and restoring functionality to the system. When she finished, she turned to Elias, her expression hopeful. This time, he managed a weary smile. "Thanks," he muttered, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "I guess I owe you one." As they approached the nebula, strange phenomena began to occur. The ship's instruments malfunctioned sporadically, readings fluctuating wildly as if the very fabric of spacetime was being warped. Bright streaks of light danced outside the viewport, swirling colors so vivid they seemed almost alive. It was breathtaking and unsettling. Elias tried to focus on piloting, but the closer they got, the more disorienting the environment became. His thoughts grew foggy, memories bleeding into his consciousness without warning. He saw flashes of Earth, the faces of loved ones long left behind, moments of joy and sorrow intertwined like threads in a tapestry. Shaking his head to clear the haze, he glanced at Luma, who appeared similarly affected. Her skin pulsed erratically and her movements slowed, as if weighed down by some invisible force. "What's happening to us?" Elias murmured, gripping the console tightly to steady himself. Luma reached out, pressing her hand against his chest once again. This time the connection was different. Instead of overwhelming visions, Elias experienced something akin to a dream, a series of fragmented images that felt both foreign and familiar. He saw vast structures floating among the stars, ancient and majestic, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. He saw beings like Luma, their forms radiant and ethereal, moving with purpose as they performed tasks he couldn't fully understand. And then he saw destruction. Worlds consumed by fire, civilizations reduced to ash, survivors fleeing in desperation. When the vision ended, Elias slumped forward, gasping for air. Tears streamed down his face, though he couldn't explain why. Turning to Luma, he found her staring at him intently, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears of her own. "You showed me your past," he whispered hoarsely. "Didn't you?" She nodded, her expression solemn. Reaching out tentatively, she traced a finger along his cheek, wiping away a tear. Then, using gestures and fragments of words she had learned, she attempted to explain. From what Elias pieced together, she belonged to an ancient race tasked with maintaining balance in the universe. They were guardians of sorts, intervening when necessary to prevent catastrophic events from spiraling out of control. But something had gone wrong, something catastrophic enough to fracture their unity and scatter them across the cosmos. "And you're here because you're testing me?" Elias asked hesitantly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Testing humanity?" Luma hesitated before nodding slowly. Her touch lingered on his arm, conveying reassurance rather than judgment. Whatever the nature of her mission, it was clear that her feelings toward him were genuine. She wasn't merely observing, she cared about what happened next. The revelation weighed heavily on Elias. On one hand, it explained so much. Her cryptic behavior, the urgency driving their journey, the visions she had shared. But on the other hand, it raised countless questions. What criteria determined whether humanity passed or failed? And what would happen if they didn't meet her expectations? Before he could dwell too deeply on these thoughts, the ship lurched, violently, jolting them both from their seats. Alarms blared as warning lights flashed across the dashboard. Outside the viewport, the swirling colors of the nebula intensified, forming a massive vortex that pulled them inexorably forward. "We're caught in some kind of gravitational pull," Elias shouted, struggling to regain control of the ship. His fingers flew across the controls, attempting to counteract the force dragging them toward the center of the storm. But no matter what he did, the ship continued hurtling forward, powerless to resist. Beside him, Luma stood calmly, her body glowing brighter than ever before. Placing her hands on either side of the console, she closed her eyes, focusing intently. Energy surged outward, enveloping the ship in a protective barrier that cushioned them against the turbulence. Slowly but surely, the violent shaking subsided, leaving them suspended within the eye of the vortex. Looking out the viewport, Elias caught his first glimpse of the structure waiting beyond the storm, a colossal sanctuary unlike anything he had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with iridescent hues, reflecting the swirling colors of the nebula like a prism. Towering spires reached skyward, adorned with symbols that pulsed faintly with light. It was simultaneously beautiful and intimidating, a testament to engineering far beyond human comprehension. "This is it," Elias breathed, awestruck. "This is where we're meant to go." Luma nodded, her expression resolute. Taking a deep breath, Elias guided the ship toward the sanctuary, navigating carefully through the remnants of the storm. As they drew closer, the structure loomed, larger, dwarfing their tiny vessel with its sheer scale. When they finally docked, the transition was seamless, as if the sanctuary itself welcomed them inside. Stepping onto the platform leading into the heart of the structure, Elias felt a mix of trepidation and wonder. Luma walked beside him, her steps confident despite the uncertainty ahead. Together they moved forward, ready to face whatever awaited them within the ancient halls of the stars. Whatever the outcome, Elias knew one thing for certain: their journey was far from over. The bond they had forged, fragile yet unbreakable, would guide them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The interior of the sanctuary was unlike anything Elias had ever imagined. The moment they stepped inside, the air seemed to hum with life, as though the very walls were alive and aware of their presence. The floor beneath their feet shimmered, faintly, pulsating in sync with the glowing symbols etched into the towering walls. Light flowed like liquid through intricate channels carved into the ceiling, casting an ethereal glow that illuminated every corner of the vast chamber. It was both beautiful and overwhelming, a place where time itself seemed to pause. Luma walked confidently ahead, her glowing skin blending seamlessly with the radiant environment. She moved with purpose, as if drawn by some invisible force guiding her deeper into the sanctuary. Elias followed closely, his senses on high alert. Despite the serene atmosphere, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Every step echoed softly, reverberating through the immense space, and the silence between those echoes felt heavy with anticipation. As they ventured further, the structure began to reveal its secrets. Strange holographic projections materialized, around them depicting scenes from across the cosmos, planets being born, stars collapsing, civilizations rising and falling. Each image carried a weight of meaning, telling stories of creation, destruction, and renewal. Luma paused occasionally to study these projections, her eyes wide with recognition. She reached out to touch one, and it responded, shifting to show a new sequence of events. Elias watched in amazement as the holograms unfolded before him. He saw glimpses of Luma's people, the ancient guardians she had spoken of earlier. They appeared as radiant beings, their forms fluid and ever-changing, working together to stabilize dying stars or prevent catastrophic collisions. Their actions were precise, deliberate, yet filled with compassion. These weren't conquerors or rulers, they were caretakers, entrusted with maintaining balance in the universe. But then the images shifted, showing chaos and devastation. Stars imploded uncontrollably, planets crumbled under tidal forces, and entire species perished in waves of cosmic destruction. Amidst the ruin, Elias saw flashes of humanity, primitive but resilient, struggling against the odds to survive. His chest tightened as he realized what this meant. Luma's mission wasn't just about testing humanity, it was about deciding whether Earth deserved a chance to join the galactic alliance her people had once protected. Finally, they reached the heart of the sanctuary, At the center of the chamber stood a massive pedestal, its surface adorned with swirling patterns that mirrored the constellations outside. Above it floated a crystalline orb, suspended mid-air without any visible support. The orb pulsed rhythmically, emitting soft waves of light that resonated with Luma's energy. She approached it slowly, her movements reverent, almost ceremonial. Elias hung back, unsure of what to do. He could feel the tension radiating from Luma, a mixture of determination and hesitation. When she finally touched the orb, the entire room lit up, bathing them in a brilliant cascade of colors. For a moment, everything went still, and then a voice, deep, melodic, and otherworldly, filled the chamber. "Guardian," it intoned, addressing Luma directly. "You have completed your trial." Elias stared at her, his heart pounding. Trial? Was this what all of this had been leading to? He glanced around nervously, half expecting something to leap out at them. But nothing did. Instead, the voice continued, speaking now in fragmented phrases that somehow conveyed complete understanding. "The subject of your evaluation stands beside you," the voice said, referring to Elias. "Through your connection, we have witnessed not only his actions but also the essence of his kind. Humanity carries within it the potential for great harm and great healing." Luma turned to look at Elias, her expression unreadable. Her hand hovered near her chest, trembling slightly. Whatever decision she made next would determine the fate of billions, not just humans but countless others who might be affected by Earth's inclusion in the galactic community. "You see value in them?" the voice asked, its tone gentle yet probing. Luma nodded firmly, her skin glowing brighter than ever before. She pressed her hand against the orb again, and a flood of memories surged forth, images of their journey together. Elias saw himself, through her eyes. The moments of frustration, the shared laughter, the quiet trust that had grown between them despite their differences. He saw how she had come to admire his resilience, his willingness to risk everything for survival, and most importantly, his capacity for empathy. When the vision ended, the voice spoke once more. "Your judgment is accepted. Humanity shall be granted provisional entry into the Alliance. However, they must prove themselves worthy in time." With those words, the orb descended gently into Luma's hands. It transformed into a smaller crystal, no larger than a pebble, yet radiating immense power. She held it carefully, turning to face Elias. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and for the first time since they'd met, she spoke clearly, in perfect English. "This is for you," she said softly, placing the crystal in his palm. "It contains knowledge, tools to help your people grow stronger, wiser. Use it wisely." Elias stared at the crystal, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility now resting in his hands. "Why are you giving this to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you earned it," she replied simply, "and because I believe in you." Before Elias could respond, the sanctuary began to change. The glowing symbols dimmed, the holograms faded, and the hum of energy dissipated. Luma stepped back, her form beginning to glow even brighter, almost blindingly so. Elias instinctively shielded his eyes, calling out to her desperately, "Wait, don't go!" But it was too late. With a final burst of light, she vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the lingering warmth of her presence. Alone in the now silent chamber, Elias sank to his knees, clutching the crystal tightly. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with emotions he couldn't quite name. Grief, gratitude, hope. They all swirled together, forming a storm within him. When Elias finally returned to the ship, the sanctuary was gone, having dissolved into the void as mysteriously as it had appeared. The nebula stretched endlessly before him, its swirling colors a reminder of the journey he had undertaken. He set course for Earth, the crystal safely secured in a protective case. As the ship drifted through the stars, Elias allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Luma's sacrifice to save him, to save humanity, was a gift he would carry with him forever. Though she was gone, her impact remained, imprinted on his soul and etched into the fabric of his memories. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding, Earth sharing the knowledge contained in the crystal, earning humanity's place among the stars. All of it required effort, patience, and faith. But Elias knew one thing for certain. They weren't alone anymore. Somewhere out there, amidst the infinite expanse of the universe, Luma's light continued to shine, a beacon of hope guiding them toward a brighter future. And as the twin suns of the distant moon rose once more in his mind's eye, Elias smiled softly, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.